Wait,
Hello,
is
everyone.
is
Welcome
that
to. Go ahead,
is that dark mode or is that just inverse video?
dark mode. I can turn it on light mode if it bothers anybody, but I imagine it's fine. Um, Hello, everyone, and welcome to the July 29th edition of the Gateway API Community Meeting. Thank you for joining. As always, this meeting is governed by the Kubernetes Code of Conduct, which effectively boils down to be nice to one another. So please do be nice to one another. We use Zoom, so when you can, please use the Zoom raise hand feature with questions or interjections, as that helps us to organize the meeting and kind of keep things flowing. If you wouldn't mind putting your name on the attendees, we appreciate that. Helps us kind of just see how things are going, what meeting times are good, etc. Keep in touch with you, that sort of thing. Uh, know who our audience is. We have a pretty. It's probably going to end up being uh, uh, a big conversation about release 1.4 today, but our agenda is open. If you'd like to add something after the release, the one item that we have, which is probably going to end up taking a lot of time, feel free. If we can't get to it today, we will park it for the next one for you. Um, Let me check the attendees list real quick here. I do not see anyone I don't recognize, so I'll assume we don't need to do introductions today. So let's get started. First and foremost, let's talk about release 1.4. Dun, dun, dun. So we had extensions, I think, for almost everything, or a good chunk of our experimental gaps got them. So I think 3 out of maybe 4, something like that. Ended up needing time extensions, which we were able to get a lot more done within that time extension. But we need to discuss what's left. We do have this discussion, which is kind of basically covering the time frame up to July 22nd, which we extended from. So we had a good long time extension, basically. What remains, I think, are these 3. These are the 3 that haven't moved yet. So we should probably go over them one by one. Let's start with the mesh resource.
Actually, can we start
And
with off-cluster gateways?
sure, let's start with off-cluster gateways. Go ahead, Flynn. Do you want to go ahead and speak
Um,
to that?
3950 should just go to 1.5, or rather should be deferred from 1.4, um, because there's still a fair amount of stuff that is not done for it because I was busy with the other ones.
Okay.
Uh, on the other hand, the GEP about this one, 3894, that one I'd like to go ahead and move in because it's pretty much just changing the type. And
What?
I don't think there's anything terribly controversial in that.
Sorry, what is 3792? What is this thing
It's
that we're moving
the
to?
it's the write-up about the problems that have to be solved for off-cluster gateways in much the same way that we did a similar problem statement for auth north-south.
Why is it? I agree the problem statement is well defined and probably uncontroversial. Why is it a memorandum?
Because all of the API definition is slated to move into a GEP with a different number. Although honestly, I did that because just leaving that one provisional seemed a little sillier than making it a memorandum that we could refer to later from other API things as the APIs evolve if they need to. I don't feel very strongly about that. We could just defer both of them and then make a later decision about whether we combine them or not.
Yeah, why
I
don't
think
we?
what did Guy do over here for 713? Because he folded a bunch of, or was wanting to fold a bunch of gaps.
It
Decline. He
was
he actually called them
declined. Yeah.
declined.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm open to suggestion. I think
I,
declined at the top. I'm not married to it, but declined at the top may be decent because it kind of immediately tells you like you shouldn't really be here if you're looking for the spec. This is more like historical,
well,
but I
what
can
I
be argued away from that.
Yeah, I mean, my case, I mean, this is all just process. So, I think there are like 5 different right answers here.
Hmm.
My own personal preference here would be to say uh, this and the API should be merged together into the same thing. Like if this is basically here's the problems we need to solve, and then there's another thing that's just proposing the API that solves a subset of those problems. Why not just bring them back
Yeah,
together?
I'm good with that.
This sounds good to me too.
I originally split them with the idea that maybe we wanted 3792 to move in 1.4 and then hold off on the other one, but like I said, I don't really feel strongly about that.
So would we call this one deferred for now then
Yes.
instead? All right.
I mean,
That's,
it can merge as provisional. It's still provisional, or we could even call it.
We don't need to do anything for that. That it already exists as provisional. So we
Well,
could
but it looks like you made some other cleanup in here, or am I
yeah, he made some
misunderstanding?
changes to language and made more specificity to the API and pulled out some of the graduation criteria. So I guess it's really we've often kind of gone back and forth on what is our actual process for these statuses. I think we can leave it provisional. I'm fine with that. One way of looking at it is we did defer another gap during this cycle and basically said deferred is where how we're parking a GEP that is no longer kind of moving in a release. So if we get more attuned to releases, deferred might take more of that meaning. We don't have to do that now, but that's the way I was kind of looking at it when I suggested deferred. It's parked for the moment.
I'm fine with that.
I'll
Mark
leave
it as
it up.
deferred. Yeah, go ahead and leave in your suggestion of deferred.
Okay.
I will take another look, but yeah, I'll take another look at this and see if there's anything that I particularly think needs to be done other than just merging it as deferred.
Sounds good. Okay. So that one we talked about first. Let's move on to the mesh resource one.
The main question about the mesh resource itself, other than things like indentation to make it line up nicely, or to make bullet points line up nicely and things like that, has to do with the life cycle of the mesh resource. The last change that I made to this, scroll down a little bit more. Actually, go back to the discussion rather than the diffs, the conversation rather than the diffs.
This one?
No. Go back. Go up to the top and click the conversation tab.
Okie dokie. Conversations. Which one do you
So
do you like?
if you scroll down a bit, it's that one.
Okay, the big long one.
Yeah. At the bottom of that is the most recent proposal about the life cycle thing. All right. Maybe this will be easier if I share my screen.
Yeah, feel free. I think you're already a co-host, so you should be good.
Hang on while I'm finding the right window to share. All right. I am not using Firefox. I am using Arc. And there are things I like about it and things I really don't. John, I don't think is on this call, sadly. But between me and Rob and John, there were a lot of questions about the life cycle of this thing, who owns it, who creates it, et cetera, et cetera. The most recent suggestion, I was kind of hoping John would be here so we could get his sense of whether this suggestion, addresses his concerns. But it boils down to, yeah, we should have a mesh resource. Chihiro should always own it. The mesh must never create it. And if it is present, the mesh can use it. And if it's not present, the mesh has to assume that it has a default configuration for anything that was in the mesh resource. And interestingly, if there's no mesh resource, obviously the implementation cannot publish anything in the mesh resource's supported features. I think that works, and we arrange it so that, well, yeah, if you're doing a conformance run, then part of your conformance run is going to be that you must create a mesh resource so that the conformance run has the ability to look at things that are supported. John has not responded to that, but Rob, what's your feeling on that since you were the other one who was actively involved in this? This is another one of those
So
cases where it feels like the best option, or it feels like a lot of our options are really not great. So,
Yeah. I mean, I would really love for to me, I still think that the right place for and right time for this to be installed is when you're installing your mesh, right? It just kind of comes along with it.
and I would hope that most folks would do that.
Yeah, but if um, yeah, if it helps, I haven't read John's most recent feedback from this morning, but the summary that you provided, I think it's a reasonable response to that. That
Okay.
this is a at minimum requirement for conformance and a strongly worded suggestion beyond that, but not a requirement.
Okay.
Um,
So I think, Shane, that what we're looking at is it should be realistic to go ahead and merge this by the end of the day.
Okay. Rob?
yeah, I mean this of the ones on the list, this one felt the closest to me, barring any unforeseen comments or feedback from John as follow up. But I think we already have 2 approvals on this one, so
Yeah.
should be close.
Sounds good.
And
Then we'll give it to the end of the day.
and in the interests of trying to kind of cover John's interests here, if you read this, you will see that overall, a lot of John's response is, yeah, I don't really think this is all that valuable, but it seems that other people do, so whatever. And, um, I mean, I'm mostly proposing it because there are things where I expect we will need some mesh configuration in the future, so we may as well go ahead and have it now. And I think that it could make conformance runs nicer as well. So, yeah,
Okie doke. All right.
I
We'll check
will
in on
stop
that.
sharing my screen.
Yeah, we'll check in on that throughout the day and ideally get it merged before the end of the day. Now, this last one on the list, I am a little dubious about. I'd like to have a discussion because I almost feel like, am I sharing the screen?
Yes.
I am going to go ahead and say, given the conversations that I've seen and how in depth they've gotten, I feel like this might not make it.
This,
Yeah.
to me, this feels like it ties into some of the things about changing the release model, right? Where at the last day of this extension, there's still a fair amount of discussion happening with places
Right.
where there's contention. I really like the idea of having a way that we can get the experiment of a particular API design out there. I really, really don't like the pressure that this seems to have gathered for, oh, this has to be a 1.4. And
I actually
really, really like to
love that you're
separate
saying
those
that.
two things. Yeah.
I love that you're saying that because during this process, I have felt kind of similarly. We do technically have this concept of prototyping. It's not very well fleshed out. It's only been used once or twice. But that like parking it for prototyping to drive consensus might be useful. I'm not sure. But anyway, just throwing that out there. And now I'm noticing hands are going up. So go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and say I think Leor's hand was up first.
yeah, thanks for bringing this. So just for context, not sure how many people in the room understand the whole context, but we, in response to the complexity of this gap, um, all the Gamma leads and some of the Gateway API leads were very helpful in getting on the meetings last week. I think we had almost stayed on the calls for maybe 4 hours total, or even more. Kind of discussed very much in depth on the problem, which by the way happens only when you go to L7. The L4 one is slightly less problematic, but it's still obviously valid to think about the future and get into the information. And this gap does get into a lot of the information, because also in the past year or two, we have expressed interest to actually do a comprehensive research of what's actually is supported today, what is the PyOrt and everything. So I was under the impression that after all these meetings, we did get into agreement to actually put this to 1.4 as experimental L4. We also agreed that it's going to be experimental, and any result is going to be good. Whether it's going to be experimental and people would love it and will eventually make it a good API, it's good. But whether we put it experimental and we pull it off, and it's just re-emphasizing that experimental should not be should not be treated as GA, something that the Gateway API project is in the interest of Gateway API project. And yes, I did not. So there may be, I cannot deny any feelings. I did not understand what's new that actually brings people to think, oh, there's so much pressure to put it 1.4. I can acknowledge that some pressure came maybe from my side, that I really wanted to respect the timelines that the project has provided. And this one got into the scoping. Obviously, there may be flaws in the process. Do we count votes? Do we not? But it has a lot of votes. It came to the scoping. It did get in. I'm not going to open the whole process discussion right now, but I can tell from my side that I try to make it to just respect the timeline. I know it's first time we're doing these timelines. And this is surprising to me, that because we finished Friday and I thought we were in agreement for 1.4 for L4 as experimental, and suddenly we're just like, oh no, we haven't agreed to anything, and we better pull it back. So I don't know. And by the way, I would just finish with saying, like, I absolutely don't care, like, throwing all this work to the bin. Like, it's nothing about I spend this time, so it should be respected or something. It's just like in the interest of the project. I think people want this API. We had numerous discussion about it, and I think we as a community want to have some advancements in 1.4, which, by the way, we're going to have a different advancement, but it's fine. But I just don't understand what new information actually came to the picture that makes that made made us pull back from some agreements we had.
Mike, you may be wanting to respond, so I'll let you skip the line if you want to.
I'll be brief. I think some of the confusion just seems to be either lack of clarity or reflecting some of the conversation that we had into the written document. I know that we made a few revisions again to that very recently this morning, but I think that was one of the issues. Is there was some stuff that we had discussed around like deny rules and things like that, and it wasn't really clear what the current proposal is that is trying to move forward. And then the other thing is that, to your point of like throwing stuff away, like that's really like the mindset that I'm most worried about with this, is that I think it's kind of a frustration of the release process that it seems to constrain work to these like blocks of only a few weeks at a time, when what I would really like to see is, honestly, it's kind of close to what we had before, where like stuff would be ongoing in development and it would take several months many times, and then what was ready to go goes, rather than trying to like condense and high pressure the scope into just, if it's complete, it goes, if it's not, it gets put on the back burner for 6 more months.
Thanks. Can I just ask a quick question? Like, so are you also like confirming the case that like we're talking about the statics of the gap? Because after every single meeting we had last week, we were
I'm not trying to block or push forward at this time. I'm just saying that.
No, one second. I'm just asking, like, there may be, like, I 100% accept the feedback. There may be, statics of this gap. that weren't in place or something, but like we had echoed the feedback on Slack with Gamma and Gateway leads after every single meeting, and basically during the meeting even. So yeah, if it's just aesthetics, maybe the conversation can be different. But if not, so probably it'll give other people to say why.
You were asking about things that changed, and the biggest thing that changed was that, from my perspective, we had reached some agreement that, yeah, deny rules go and deny rules will not be part of 1.4, but they are very much part of the proposal as currently written. That's a problem. That is problematic. It seems to me to be an area where we reached an agreement, but the document does not reflect the agreement that we reached. So, that's a thing. That's probably my most significant objection here right now. But also, more than that, if we're in a position where some of the folks working on the GEP believed that that agreement was different than the agreement that some of the other folks believe we reached, that is a problem. And that by itself is sufficient reason that I say, I don't think we get that resolved by rushing into it at the last minute. I think we resolve that by backing up and kind of trying to figure out, all right, where did we miss this? How did we go ahead and get into this state? And then we fix it in the longer term.
Well, I'll just relate to the deny thing. Nothing had been intentionally got in and say, okay, we agreed on something. I felt like, I think there was the part where just you, Mike, and I were in the call, I think, before other people joined, where we said that we may add deny as extended in the future. That's what I tried to put in the gap. The reason I left it there, which already clarified in the gap throughout, is because deny, if and when added, and I think this is the language there, is going to change the semantics of allow, because suddenly a presence of deny is changing some allow semantics. Again, we know Linkerd does not support deny. That's why we also pushed it off. We want to reduce the scope. I was 100% I 100% felt that you are like in, after also Mike brought ST feedback, like you were not very much opposed to having it as extended in some point. I think the GEP does not suggest we edit like commit or something, and I 100% fine of like removing it to the end. Like this morning I moved it to like potential future enhancement. So just wanted to echo, and again, I'm not like, your feedback is 100% clear. Like, maybe this wasn't represented as, very much not in scope. Yeah, I added in a very big note, and then I removed it to the back. But yeah, I mean, I think the agreement we had is still, I think we're still on the same page overall, even if you read something different. So yeah, I did not had any impression that deny is agreed to be in. And I expected that the future GEP iteration, if and when we added extended feature, we'll just discuss that, which I thought is the same as your agreed. And regarding like whether we have a broader problem for agreements and stuff, definitely it's where's this thing. I thought we, usually it comes within, a motivation or interest. Why should we all come together and discuss the problem? For example, the problem of, okay, is portability between meshes a goal with Gamma? Obviously something we had discussed a lot, but we discussed in the form of this GEP, and we postponed discussing it for a while until this GEP. I'm still in the camp of like, I think we all on the same page of what we had agreed. And I also acknowledge and take the feedback that it may seem rushed, that, some of the things we had agreed were just added notes there that it's going to be postponed. And the reason is because some of us had concerns about just defining L4 and not relating to anything L7, which may be problematic for this. So I try to kind of collect all the feedback and address like most of our different opinions there. So no one's actually felt like, hey, I said L7 is important to reason about, and this gap just talked to L4. So yeah.
Rob, what were you going to say?
Yeah, few thoughts. I think, like others have alluded to, this is pointing out some flaws in the release this cycle or our process this cycle. I can speak to the intent of the process, and where it feels like we missed the mark this time. The idea was to add checkpoints. Historically, I'll back up a ways, because I think Mike mentioned that how things worked it before, in some ways is appealing, and I absolutely get that. What unfortunately that led to, from my perspective, is, as a maintainer, you're stuck making a really awful decision at some point, because there's this like long running set of changes. And how do you decide at that last minute, when something is 90% of the way there, and you've got something else that's 80% of the way there, and something that's 60% of the way there? Where do you make that cut of, well, we got to release sometime? And so we often would just kind of keep on extending and not releasing, right? And
That's a different problem, though.
Yeah,
It is.
the way
It
around
is.
that is to be more fixed with the release date, and like if it's done, it's done, and the release date isn't moving.
Yeah, and that is absolutely what we are trying to do now. What we have done as a result of that is we've added deadlines that are not meant to be only do this by this point. It's, if you want to stay on track for this release train or whatever, you gotta at least hit this date. And what has happened, I guess, somewhat predictably as a result of that, is everyone is just barely hitting those dates. And then, in this case, what I think further exacerbated the issue is this PR sat for around a month before the feedback that ended up becoming more contentious, was added to the PR like 24 hours before the deadline.
Yeah, we've
And that's
discussed that as well, and that feedback was. There's a lot of backstory on this one that we got into a really long conversation about. With, yeah, that feedback was being provided, and
I,
it should not be the case that feedback does not get attention until it's put on GitHub either, right?
Well, Flynn,
So we
it's not a
have,
case. I mean, it's not a case we can continue this rabbit hole we had of like, just proving the facts without getting forward. I can happily share my screen right now and just provide all the background for everyone who's interested, but it doesn't move us forward. So it doesn't matter to
right, but it
repeat.
also does not move us forward to say that the feedback didn't exist until 24 hours beforehand.
No, the feedback as a whole, and especially as you posted it, wasn't exist until 24 hours, and I can share the feedback there.
Okay, I
I'm not
disagree
saying you
with you
did
on
not.
that.
Okay, so we'll just exchange share screen after that personally, but like
No, I mean, we can agree to disagree on
but
that as well, right? But
right, but like
it's
I was about to say that you did provide some
All right,
feedback
let's
about,
rein it in.
for
yeah,
example, that
Let's
just
yeah.
let's rein it the hell
because
in.
Let's rein
no,
it
I'm just
in and
saying like
agree that no,
we're
wait.
dancing around facts that doesn't give us forward, but like everyone has its own facts in his mind, which is not really useful. So if we really wanna do something useful, we should just focus on what it's not like, okay, it wasn't in GitHub, so it wasn't a
The
feedback.
Put
So
more
the
simply, real
thing,
quick. Put more simply. Can somebody just say, in simple terms, what we need in order to be successful here going forward?
we need a way that, okay, first, we need to be sure that feedback is given in some way that is fairly clear in a timely manner. If we want to say that the only path for feedback is GitHub, I won't like that, but okay, we can live with that, right? But I'm also
What
going to go back to a point that Mike said. If you look at software engineering in general, we've got release dates, we've got sets of features, or sorry, we have releases, we have sets of features, and we have times. And for the most part, or maybe I should say, we've got quality, time, and features, right? And you generally get two of those. So what we've done at this point is we've said, hey, this set of releases, here's the set of features, and they have to be done on this time. And historically, if you look at software engineering as a whole, that means we sacrifice quality. So if we want the quality, we need to take the time factor out of this. And if we want quality on this particular GEP, given that we have concerns about the quality of it, I would argue that it needs to be divorced from 1.4, and we need to go through and say, okay, so we've reached the end of the 1.4 scoping phase. This is a miss. We should go ahead and put it into the next thing after we figure out how to do it with quality. In exactly
what
the same way that we already did with off-cluster gateway APIs, or off-cluster gateways, for example.
And yeah, if you
what
want quality on a date, what you need to do is make sure that the work continues rather than stop.
Right.
what will
That's good
I
feedback.
just I think that's useful. One thing I'm just earlier on what you had mentioned is if all the feedback needs to be on GitHub, I think that is I think there's a lot of good that can come from discussions on Slack, on calls, whatever, to work through things. But what I would ask is, from the perspective of a maintainer, I didn't see that, right? And so what I see looking at this GEP
Thanks,
is,
Mike.
oh, this looks on track, right? I'm not seeing comments that are here are resolved. We're a day out. Seems like we're doing all right. And then I see a comment come in, that suggests, hey, maybe we're not on track. So I think
And I think that's fair.
yeah, okay.
I mean, I think that criticism is entirely fair, and I think we already talked about how. So yeah, as a group, when we have those conversations on Slack, we should go and summarize them on GitHub, and you've seen that happening in the last week too. So I think that people seem to be basically on board with that, which is great.
So to summarize, it was going along reasonably well. However, some big kind of changes and some, I guess, time-based, some problems with the timing kind of got us into a situation where we suddenly have more contention than we originally anticipated. And we have to work through that, but now we're like saying that we have to close today, et cetera, right? So
Right.
the process is failing us in terms of being able to do these things well, get quality, and ultimately avoid us being irritated with each other, because we're trying to like crunch for this. And I think that's all really good feedback. I do want to just real quick though, Lior, just to make sure that your voice is heard here, because I think that to some degree, like others, you've been kind of a victim of that bad process. Do you have anything
think
else
that's
that
fair
you
too.
need in order to be successful? Like, I think that we've kind of failed you a little bit in this. We need to make improvements. What else do you need to be successful right now? What else do you want to say about the situation? And then let's try to figure out what the next steps are here with, I think ultimately, without just saying this is deferred and we're done with it right now. I think is what everybody's kind of pushing for. Is that what I'm gathering? Like everybody's like
Deferred, and we think we should continue working
I
on
may have
it with the
misspoken,
idea
sorry.
of bringing it back for a future rev. I
Is
certainly
that what you
don't think we
that,
should just throw the. I do not think we should throw this work away.
Agree. I very
yeah.
much do not want to throw this away.
Yeah.
either. I think this is
Yeah,
a
I think
very good start and good progress.
Right.
yeah, and I definitely
I
think
think
we
I
should
was
keep. Yeah.
Right. Keep going. That's sorry. I may have misspoken, but what I was sensing was the this idea that like the release process just is not working for this process to actually go forward well. If we stop here and park it, it doesn't necessarily mean it's dead, but it means we got to pick it up like later. Like we need to keep going, right?
I-
is what it was
I think what
gathering.
I'm objecting to is things like if we park this, I don't really want to park it. I want to separate it from 1.4.
Okay, I think
I
you're
don't want
saying
to
what I'm
lose.
thinking.
Yeah, I don't want to just
Same.
okay, maybe we put it down and come back to it a week later, but
Yeah. You're
I don't want to
articulating what
stop
I'm
for
trying to
any.
get at. So
Okay, great.
I
Yeah.
agree. I think that this may be a good example of how like trying to do especially experimental, prototypical, like coming up with new things and get them to quality just doesn't fit in this. Let's try to go with this very rigid timeline process. That rigid timeline process works a little bit better for like, hey, get your conformance tests in, I think, than it does for this kind of thing.
Or
So
possibly for promoting from experimental to standard.
yeah, for possibly for
Right.
that part of the pipeline, because we are learning as we go here and trying to like say, okay, you have an hour for learning, So, okay. All right.
I just
Go ahead, Leor.
now.
Shane, you asked Leor what
Yeah,
else he thought he
I
needed, and
got
we have
caught up
not
in it.
given
I
him a chance to
apologize.
talk.
Leor,
So.
you have the floor. Please tell us your thoughts.
Yeah, I'll start by saying that like I echo all the feedback about releases and everything and timelines potentially making it not useful for I don't know authors and gap feedbacks, but I do see the other way of like maintainers getting the burden of like if we're doing something like not in a very good timeline. And I would also say that I think that if these timelines weren't there, and again, I'm saying these timelines absolutely were not useful in success of this gap for 1.4. But I would say that I think if these timelines weren't there, I would carefully say that potentially the feedback and the calls we all had last week, and like the most fruitful feedback we got into, and the discussions weren't happening until now because none of us were just okay. We need to make time for this because this is actually important. So we need to find a balance there, and I don't think any of us actually discussed to the point of how do we find a balance there, because it's all open source, nobody owns nothing to anyone, and every feedback is appreciated, right? But like so obviously this particular one is important to many of us, so we all care about the feedback, but it's probably more important as we actually talk about going forward with it. And I can say over the last 1.5 years where I was trying to talk about identity-based authorization, and probably before I was talking about this, some other people talking about before me, none of us actually expressed the same level of concerns. And again, I'm saying, some of us are saying we not even need authorization policy in the Gateway API. This is actually some feedback from some of our mesh leads and other like authorization policy for East-West. And we all danced around like, oh, this is great, we should have it, or we should do the research or something. But none of us actually spend the time of like, okay, actually let's get into the weeds and like start solving this problem or agreeing on the goal even. Now, I also want to say, because you gave me an open mic, that I also don't think documenting the process for like feedback absolutely must be on GitHub. Otherwise, it's not like it's something that will either be sustainable or useful. I do understand the lack of visibility for other maintainers or people who are not involved, but I would say, which is something I didn't have time to say last time, I would say that Flynn did reach out to me and say some feedback, which was absolutely useful. So I also should be responsible making sure that Flynn reached out to me on the gap, so I'm not just ignoring his reach out to me on Slack, so I'm not ignoring and moving forward with a gap without it, which is what I try to do. It doesn't matter for now, but again, I think Rob's point about 24 hours before feedback wasn't just related to Flynn, so I would just clean this out of the table right now.
I don't know. I thought it was just me.
No, it wasn't. But yeah, I think, practically speaking, I think this timeline was one of the reasons we all got together. And this timeline, as well as some messages from Nick about like getting together to solve the definition of gamma, was one of the reasons we all got together to actually solve it. But I can tell you, I've wanted this way before, and I don't think it's just me. And apparently some potentially users of this API, we had this conversation as well, wanted something like this before, but we just have never gotten to solve this. So while I do very much hope we get together and continue solving this, I really don't think that it will be to the same level of, I would say commitment, but it's not probably the right word, from most of us to actually provide the feedback and make sure we're moving it forward. Because right now, hey, it's not going to be in 1.4. It's not a worry anymore. We have, I don't know, a few months until 1.5. When 1.5 comes in, we get to worry about it. So this is a big concern I have right now. So yeah. And the last concern is that I don't think any of us is not in agreement on what we're actually going to propose as experimental. So I don't think there's going to be any change in scope from what all of us had already agreed at this point. So this is why, like, I don't think Flynn would just come over and say, "Oh, we embrace denied link ready. I just implemented denied link ready over the weekend." I don't think John would say that he loves this API and he definitely think it should move forward. What I do think is that we just need feedback from people, because as smart as we are, I mean, we don't know what our users want, and we cannot guess if they want portability or don't want portability. And some of us have different opinions, so we should absolutely use the machinery of experimental and get it in and get it as experimental. It doesn't mean that it will stay in the project, and we should be rigid to remove this API if no implementations or no feedback is coming. So
yeah.
Just a time check that we're getting close to the 10-minute mark, and we do technically have 2 other topics. I don't know how much time they're going to take, but we can probably go a little bit further, but we should keep it constrained.
Yeah, no, you're right. I'll just so some final thoughts here. This has been a frustrating process for me, at least. I have limited visibility. There's a lot I don't know about what happened here. I know there were a lot of calls with between mesh leads. I was able to join, I think, the last one of them. I don't know if there's been more. And that was on Friday. And when I left that call, I thought there was some agreement on what the path forward was, that, this would be experimental. There was, better to try and get feedback from users than to, take advantage of experimental. This is ultimately something that we want to be able to prototype in, right? I think Shane and I have some shared goals there of allow for experimentation and prototyping, and that's a large part of why we've made this bigger shift to an experimental channel that is in a different API group, has this very clear X prefix with all the names. There's no confusion about if this is stable. And then one of the things that was unique with this gap, and I think was decided on that call, was that we should add some guardrails so it was automatically removed if it didn't gain traction. And the combination of those things feels pretty compelling to me. It seems like, maybe I misunderstood the consensus at that point, given the discussion we're having now, but I don't know how we can improve this going forward. I'm not seeing any clear requests for changes to the gap, and that is concerning to me. Like I think, Flynn, your call out of, make it clear that deny isn't in scope is good, but I thought I saw that in the latest iteration.
No, I want deny not in the proposal. Right.
At all.
Because we are not proposing deny as part of the API right now. That means if somebody looks at the GEP and they see all this stuff about deny, we are muddying that water. We need to be clear, not just, hey, deny is not in scope. Deny should not be in the protocol proposal. It's not part of the proposed API. And things like that are what flipped me over from feeling like we had consensus and then looking at the actual proposal and going, this is not what we had consensus on.
Okay, that's fair. That seems, is that the only thing, or are there other things that I'm missing?
That's probably 90% of it. Maybe more than
Okay.
90% of it. But that sort
We're
of
able to get
thing,
clarity on the like L7's out of scope. We're not doing the service target ref thing. We're clear on that, right?
I think
Yeah.
so. Yeah,
I
I
I
mean,
think
so.
we're clear. I think we're also clear on deny. It's just the way it was written, and I'm definitely taking the feedback to myself that I now know how to
Yeah.
flip Flint. So I know how to flip it if I need it, but I also know how to avoid it. So I'm sorry, Flynn, but I think we're still on agreement, and I'm happy to pull it off.
Oh man, I shouldn't have given him that ammo.
All right, I'm gonna call
But
it for
yeah,
time. Go
one
ahead.
last comment. One last
Yeah.
comment there, Shane, is that seeing things like that in the proposal where the proposal doesn't match the consensus immediately raises concerns in my mind about, okay, I have to go and read this much more carefully to make sure of, are there other places where it doesn't line up with what I thought we had agreed on, and that sort of thing. That it's not just a matter of phrasing, it's a matter of the phrasing indicating that something didn't get communicated. Or, I mean, the most negative way to read that, and this is not what I think happened, but the most negative way to read that is somebody looking at it and going, I'm just going to ignore this piece of the consensus because I don't like it. And like I said, I don't think that's what's going on. I think that Lior was operating in good faith. But it's not comfortable to be looking at this and going, okay, what's going on? How are we so far removed from what I thought we agreed on?
Yeah, guarantee you, Lior was operating in good faith, but I get the point that you're making. It's like
Absolutely.
we're constrained and unable to get to consensus, and this is causing frustrations, and it's causing. I get that.
Yeah.
And I got to wrap it up because we do have at least the two more things. Although one of them
I
we
think
kind of
we've,
touched on.
yeah, I think we've covered everything
Okay,
I
so we'll
wanted to
just
cover
we
in
got a
mine,
little
so
bit of
I think
time.
we can go straight to Candace.
So unfortunately, where we're at though, I do have to wrap this up. Unfortunately, despite me appreciating and agreeing the feedback that the timing constraints have caused some dilemmas here, our release process that we're doing for 1.4 is, I'll say, more structured than some of the ones we've done in the past, in an effort for good reasons that are well intentioned. But I take the feedback very seriously that man, this when you're trying to do something that's more exploratory, these kind of crunches and stuff like that are not great. And then having to park it, that potentially kills it or worse. And so the feedback is taken, but at the same time, we've had a bunch of GEPs that have had to go through these rules. So I think we really are, in practical terms, in a situation where this needs to be resolved by the end of the night, or else we kind of do have to say that it's deferred in terms of 1.4, because if we don't do that, then we're saying that this one's getting special privileges. Other people have had to follow the rules and move forward within the structure. I want to change the structure, but I think that's where we're at right now today.
What the distinction I would like to make for this and in all GEPs, and I think it's along the lines of what Flynn and Mike have been asking for, is GEPs can merge at any time. But if this doesn't merge as implementable this afternoon, sometime today, then it's not going to be released in 1.4. But it can merge as implementable tomorrow. It just won't be in 1.4.
Yeah, I think that's where we're at from a technical perspective. I don't love it, but it's just that's the rules everybody's had to go with so far. So it would be weird to just break them right in the middle of it.
I do think that's just a little bit different than what you were saying, though, because I think you were saying we could merge it as deferred, and I'm saying we can still merge it as implementable.
You're right. I did use the word deferred.
Yeah.
I think the distinction that it's really just that we're saying it's not going into 1.4 is fine, if it doesn't make it tonight. But I don't love that either. So, all right. But for the moment, let's just assume that we're not making, if it doesn't merge tonight, we're going to say we're holding off on 1.4. And then we really need to revisit how this even works, because I don't actually think that's what we should be doing. So, all right, cool. Moving on. I guess we said we're going to skip this because we kind of talked about it. Candace, you have some questions about
Yes.
how backend TLS policy should work.
Right. So Norwin was working on a pull request to standardize the status basically for invalid backend TLS policy. And we came up just with this point of contention regarding the validity of the certificates in a backend TLS policy. There can be up to 8 CA certificate refs. And I think he proposed that even if only one of the CA certificate refs is invalid, then the whole policy should be marked as invalid, and that would mean it would be blocking all traffic for all services connected to it. And I propose basically only if 100% of the certificates are invalid, that it would block all the traffic. Because so if there's only one certificate and it's invalid, then we should say that's an invalid policy. But if there's 8 certificates and only one is invalid, I feel like we shouldn't say that that's an invalid backend TLS policy. So we have pros and cons.
And I think one of the things to keep in mind is the position of if any are invalid, it is all invalid, can be backed off of fairly easily. But the other one is harder. I think it's easier to start with it's completely invalid if one is invalid, and then say, okay, well, due to our experiments, due to using this API now, we see that that really isn't the way to do it, and back off of that, than to say we start the other way, right? I think that's more difficult to shift from being permissive and trying to be more strict later because we learned that we shouldn't be, versus being restrictive and then saying, okay, actually we can do more permissive because we've learned things over time.
I think this is a really strange one where like every CA cert that you add to a backend TLS policy is effectively loosening validation. You know, if you have one and then you say, actually, I'll accept 2, like anything that matches either one of these because these are ORed together, you're loosening validation. So I agree with Candace's suggestion here that, you know, the most likely scenario I can imagine here is that you have 3 valid CA certs, you add another one and your config map isn't there yet, right? And then you end up completely breaking your application, and that feels like a bad day. I know we are very much trying to fail fast wherever we can, but this feels like one where the lack of a CA cert is not really, it's just that validation is tighter than it otherwise would have been, which feels like a better failure mode than, you know, just completely blocking everything. We should absolutely, you know, indicate this in status. I just feel like, you know, blocking traffic is a step too far, but I see there are other hands, so maybe I.
Can I? So
Go ahead, Ricardo.
my question is more like, what means invalid? Because maybe you have a secret, but the secret doesn't have a valid X509, you know? So it's not just about not having it present, but maybe you have something that will really break your backend. So you need to do some parsing, and you should probably be aware of like saying like, hey, I'm not gonna accept anything of this because one of them is broken. So I think it depends a lot on how the backend deals with invalid and what invalid means. If it just like not found, or if it's something like an invalid value inside the secret.
The proposal was for just not found. I don't think within the API that we can propose every implementation goes so far as to parse all the certificates, check to make sure that they're not expired, do everything else that they need to do to validate a certificate.
Can
Although
the
any
OR or is misconfigured part here, can that not be construed as the thing that Ricardo was talking about?
The or is misconfigured.
Yeah,
Is
am
that
I
what you
sharing my
said?
screen? Yeah. Am I sharing my screen? This language right here, to me, originally spoke to what Ricardo was saying, which is
Yep.
it can't be resolved or is misconfigured, meaning there's something wrong with the certificate. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, that's Norwin's GEP. So I think I may have had a question about that myself. I don't see the comment on here though, but
Katarzyna?
Yes, hi. So I put this into the comment, but I think that we should treat the backend TLS policy as validate all of the certificates at once. And I think because the support for more than one certificate is implementation specific. So my proposal was to actually split this problem into two. One problem is when we should mark backend TLS policy as invalid. And another problem is how implementation should handle invalid backend TLS policy. So the thing is that when customer is creating the resource and there is at least one reference that is broken, so we should mark this as invalid. And I think that in this case, implementation should reject backend TLS policy because it is easy for customers to notice this error and to fix this. And I think that another problem is what happens when customer is updating backend TLS policy and working backend policy, TLS policy happens to be invalid. And I think that in this case, implementation may reject the backend TLS policy and leave the old backend policy. That means that the traffic the setup that was working, should be, for example, it might not be updated, and the backend TLS policy should be marked with the status as invalid. And customer or a user who will be configuring this should know that this particular backend TLS policy, the new updated one, it was not applied. Something in this direction. Yes, Shane?
I'm just realizing that we went past time, unfortunately, but I think I like what you're proposing. So because we are past time, thank you for that update. Katarzyna did have this update here. For those who are interested, the PR is 3909. I have put it on my list to take a look at. Please do jump in there and contribute. Especially for those who are going to be implementing or already implementing backend TLS policy, please help us come to a conclusion here.
Okay, thank you. So I guess bye-bye.
Yeah, I
Everyone.
didn't even catch that we had gone past the hour.
Yeah,
So
sure.
we
thank
can
you all very much.
pick it up again
Yeah.
next time.
Yeah, we
Thanks
can park
much.
it for next time too. Thank you all very much for your time. Until next time.
Bye bye.